The message arrived without ceremony, cutting into the secure communications channel reserved for only the most urgent transmissions. The voice was metallic, guttural, layered with tones that no human throat could produce. It spoke one sentence, translated in real time. Submit or burn. No introduction. No terms beyond surrender. Then silence. The origin trace confirmed what everyone feared. Coordinates far beyond the solar system. A signal powerful enough to punch through space without relay. It was not a bluff. Within hours, astronomers confirmed the approaching formation, hundreds of ships in tight phalanx, each the size of a city. Their hulls reflected no sunlight, as though they swallowed it. The structure at their head, elongated, spired like a blade, was identified as the command vessel. Sensor data showed weapon systems capable of erasing continents in seconds. On every encrypted channel, one fact became unavoidable: humanity had no way to stop them. The invaders were known, at least to other species. Fragmentary intercepts from deep space probes had recorded their campaigns against other civilizations. They called themselves the Tyrant, though translations of their language offered variations like Dominion-born or Children of the Throne. They were expansionists without pretense of diplomacy. Where they arrived, they either absorbed or obliterated. Their leader, their king, was more than a ruler. He was a warlord of legend, celebrated for extinguishing 10 starfaring nations and scattering their survivors to the edges of the galaxy. Every appearance of his flagship ended in conquest. The Tyrant King's demands were relayed not just to governments but directly to Earth's population through hacked broadcasts and hijacked satellites. The sight of him, towering, armored in living metal that pulsed with his heartbeat, was calculated to instill dread. His eyes were like molten glass, his voice a grinding of stone. He promised annihilation if humanity resisted, enslavement if they submitted. The United Nations convened under emergency charter, the Assembly's chamber filled with leaders who only weeks ago had been arguing over trade disputes and border tensions. Now, those disputes evaporated. Intelligence assessments painted a stark picture. Earth's military forces, even united, would last mere hours in open engagement. The Tyrant weapons could pierce planetary shields and ignore atmosphere entirely. Counterattack was not an option. Survival demanded something other than force. The proposal came quietly, almost as an afterthought, from a voice at the edge of the Security Council's table, a senior intelligence liaison. If war could not be fought, perhaps it could be ended before it began, not through surrender, but by removing its architect. Not an army. Not a fleet. One person. The name put forward was Alex Rains, a diplomat and public record, but within intelligence circles, his reputation carried a different weight. He was known for ending conflicts before they escalated, sometimes in ways that could not be acknowledged. Years ago, he had been instrumental in averting a border war between 2 rival space colonies, officially by facilitating dialogue, unofficially through actions never detailed in the archives. He spoke 6 alien trade languages fluently, and could read a room faster than most could read a sentence. Where others argued, he observed. Where others demanded, he offered silence until the right moment came. Rains accepted without hesitation. Not out of patriotism alone, but because he understood what would happen if the Tyrant King saw humans as weak. A galaxy-spanning predator would not be content with one victory. He would make an example of Earth to cow other species. The mission, in its simplest terms, was impossible: reach the king, stand in his presence, and find a way to stop him, permanently, before the first shot was fired. Preparation took less than a day. The Tyrant demanded a representative for terms of surrender. It was the opening Earth needed. The plan was never written down, it existed only in the minds of 3 people: Rains, the intelligence chief, and the UN Secretary General. Should it fail, there would be no rescue. Should it succeed, no one would speak of it. When the shuttle launched, the night over the Pacific was clear. From the ground, it was just another point of light rising toward the stars, indistinguishable from satellites or aircraft. Those who watched could not know that inside sat the one man who might decide the fate of their species. He sat alone, eyes forward, hands still, carrying nothing that could be mistaken for a weapon. His mind replayed the voice that had started it all: submit or burn. The tyrant thought they understood what humans would choose. They were wrong. The air inside the alien vessel carried a faint vibration, as if the entire structure hummed with the slow pulse of something alive. The corridors were immense, built for creatures larger than any human, with walls that curved upward into shadow. Every surface was layered in symbols, carvings that shimmered faintly, shifting when viewed from the corner of the eye. Armed sentinels lined the path, their armor flowing in plates that adjusted as they moved, weapons folded seamlessly into their forearms. Their stares did not waver, though there was no visible expression to read on their angular, predatory faces. Rains moved without hesitation, matching the steady pace set by the escort. He measured the rhythm of their movements, the subtle way they angled their bodies to maintain dominance over the narrowest points of the passage. The air smelled metallic, tinged with something like burned stone. It was the scent of a place where diplomacy had never been attempted. At the end of the hall, the space opened into a chamber vast enough to swallow a stadium. The floor was a single slab of dark material that seemed to drink the light, while above, suspended columns floated without support, each carved with scenes of conquest, ships burning in planetary skies, alien warriors standing on piles of the fallen. At the center, upon a platform carved in spirals, sat the tyrant king. His frame was immense, his shoulders bearing the weight of an organic crown fused directly into his skull. The living metal of his armor shifted with his breath, its surface covered in etched victories. In one clawed hand, he held a weapon that looked grown rather than forged, its blade the color of deep ocean under storm. His gaze tracked Rains with the casual certainty of a predator observing smaller prey. "You are the one sent to speak for your world?" The translation was instant, the voice amplified by the chamber itself. Rains inclined his head. "I am." The king's posture leaned forward, armor flexing audibly. "Then speak your surrender. I will make it swift." The gathered court reacted with a low ripple, warriors, advisors, and ceremonial guards arrayed in tiers, their bodies adorned with symbols of their own kills. Every eye was fixed on the human standing alone on the dark floor. Rains met the king's gaze without flinching. "I came to discuss terms that avoid the destruction of both our peoples." Laughter broke from the tiers above, not the kind born of amusement but the sharp, guttural rhythm of derision. The king's voice cut through it. "You think there is a cost to our victory?" "There is always a cost," Rains said evenly. The king rose from his platform, towering above everyone in the chamber. He began to descend the spiraled steps, each movement accompanied by the whisper of armor adjusting to his gait. As he closed the distance, the space seemed to shrink. "You misunderstand," the king said. "We take worlds not because we need them, but because they are ours to take. You speak of peace as if it were currency. I do not bargain with prey." Rains noted every detail, the distance between guards, the positioning of banners, the way the court shifted when the king moved. He catalogued the cadence of the king's speech, the subtle change in tone when he dismissed a point. In that dismissal, Rains saw the truth. Here, survival depended not on argument, but on proving one's will to act without hesitation. The king stopped less than 2 arms' lengths away, close enough for Rains to see the faint pulse of veins beneath the living metal. "Your kind will kneel, or they will burn. Speak your choice." "I am not here to kneel," Rains replied. The chamber fell into a silence so heavy it seemed to press on the skin. The king's head tilted slightly, as though appraising the human with fresh calculation. Then, with a single wave of his hand, he dismissed the audience, leaving only his closest guards. The human had not secured peace. He had not changed the king's mind. But in that moment, Rains understood something essential. The tyrant respected nothing they could not fear. And fear, he realized, could be given without the raising of a single weapon. The invitation came as a command, issued with the authority of someone who had never known refusal. The king summoned Rains to dine in what was described through the translator as a meal before judgment. It was a tradition reserved for enemies whose fate had already been decided, a gesture that carried both contempt and finality. Refusing would have been seen as weakness. Accepting was walking into the lion's jaws. Rains agreed without pause. The dining chamber was smaller than the throne hall but no less imposing. The table, a single slab of dark stone, was set with dishes that looked more like works of alien sculpture than anything meant for consumption. The food itself shimmered with unnatural colors, steaming faintly in the cool air. Each item seemed alive in some subtle way, tendrils curling and relaxing as though sensing the presence of the diners. The king sat opposite, flanked by his personal guards, his weapon propped casually within reach. Rains ate nothing. His hands remained in plain sight, his posture controlled, his breathing steady. He listened as the king spoke of past victories, planets broken under bombardment, civilizations reduced to servitude, rulers executed before their people to stamp out hope. Every story was told with the satisfaction of someone who saw conquest as art. When the king paused, Rains reached into the inner fold of his formal jacket and produced a small object. It was a pen, sleek, matte black, understated. No engravings, no decoration. The sort of thing easily dismissed as an artifact of bureaucracy. He placed it on the table and pushed it forward, the motion unhurried. "A gift," Rains said. "From one leader to another. On my world, it is used to seal agreements." The king's eyes narrowed slightly, his attention caught not by the words but by the calm certainty with which they were delivered. He reached forward, claws curling delicately to lift the pen. The living metal of his armor shifted to accommodate the movement. He turned the object in his hands, inspecting it. The tip retracted with a click when he pressed it. The sound was unfamiliar in the chamber's stillness. In that moment, a needle-thin sliver emerged from inside the pen's body, too small to notice without looking for it, too fast to register even if one did. It pricked the king's palm, releasing a payload engineered in secrecy over the past 72 hours. The toxin was designed to bypass the tyrant's unique circulatory defenses, riding along neural pathways until it reached the central clusters that governed motor control and respiration. There would be no scent, no taste, no visible wound. It would appear as if fate had struck. The king continued speaking, unaware, tracing the pen's shape as he remarked on the strangeness of human customs. Rains answered politely, neither pushing nor retreating from the conversation. Each second stretched with deliberate normalcy. The toxin moved faster than most pathogens but slower than any conventional weapon, a creeping inevitability. Midway through recounting his 15th campaign, the king's voice faltered. It was subtle at first, a minor hitch, but it drew the eyes of his guards. His next words were slurred, his breath coming shorter. One hand braced against the table as the other instinctively reached for his chest. The guards stepped forward, but the king waved them off, pride refusing to acknowledge weakness. His legs buckled moments later. The sound of his collapse echoed off the chamber walls. Rains did not move from his seat. He watched as the guards surrounded their ruler, confusion and disbelief etched into every motion. The king tried to speak but managed only a rasp that never formed into words. Then, the stillness of the room deepened. When the guards finally turned toward him, Rains met their eyes with the same calm he had held since entering the ship. No weapon drawn. No violence seen. The act had been as silent as breathing. The message, however, was louder than any battle. Humanity could reach anyone, anywhere, and end them without warning. The chamber erupted in motion, but it was not the roar of a military force springing into battle. It was confusion, raw and unprepared. The guards who had stood like statues only moments before were now exchanging rapid bursts of their native tongue, their tones edged with disbelief. No one dared touch the body at first, as if acknowledging the king's collapse might shatter the order of their world. Two senior officers moved to lift him, their movements stiff with ceremonial caution, but the weight of his armor and the unresponsive slackness of his body told them what they didn't want to accept. A ruler who had never been defeated, who had stood unchallenged for decades, was now utterly still. His crown, fused to flesh, seemed almost heavier without the force of his will holding it aloft. Rains sat without speaking, his gaze level, his breathing steady. He didn't feign concern or satisfaction. He allowed the silence between them to do the work. It was the kind of silence predators understand, the pause after a kill when no one dares move for fear of becoming the next target. The guards looked at him differently now. There was no accusation in their eyes, only calculation. The court officials arrived quickly, summoned by the urgency of the situation. Their armor was ceremonial rather than functional, gilded and polished. They approached with a mixture of reverence and dread, exchanging words in low tones, their glances returning again and again to the lone human at the table. None asked him what had happened. None accused. In their culture, strength was proven by results, not by process. The result here was undeniable. The ranking advisor, a towering figure with braided metal cords running down his armor, stepped forward and demanded to know why Rains was still present. He didn't answer immediately, letting the question hang in the air until the advisor's tone shifted from challenge to inquiry. Then, in a measured voice, Rains said he had come to speak with whoever now held authority. He offered no claim of responsibility, no justification, only a statement of readiness to deal with the successor. That word, successor, landed heavily. Among the Tirate, succession after a ruler's death was not a ceremonial matter, it was a battle waiting to happen. Every high-ranking warlord in the fleet would now see an opportunity to claim the throne, and any delay risked tearing their empire into open conflict. The presence of a human who had sat in the king's chamber during his final moments was a complication none had anticipated. The advisors conferred in terse exchanges, their voices clipped. The guards held position, no longer blocking Rains but not relaxing either. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours until the advisor returned, his tone formal. He declared that the council would hear Rains, but only in private session. That offer was more than he had expected. It was an acknowledgement that he was no longer just an emissary from a minor world. He was a player in their most sacred and dangerous arena of power. When the council gathered, their demeanor was markedly different from the jeering court of earlier hours. They listened without interruption as Rains laid out terms that recognized humanity's sovereignty and forbade any military incursion into Earth's territory. He did not posture or plead. His tone was precise, his words leaving no ambiguity about the consequences of violating the agreement. The implication was never spoken aloud but settled in the minds of every Tirate present. If their king could be ended without warning, so could any of them. The debate that followed was brief. Fear had a way of streamlining decision-making. By the end of the session, the council agreed to the terms. The agreement would be recorded as a mutual accord in their archives, preserving their pride, but its enforcement would rest entirely on the understanding of what had just taken place. When Rains was escorted from the chamber, there was no applause, no formal acknowledgement. Yet the way the guards stood aside, the way the council members avoided his eyes, spoke volumes. He had entered their flagship as a representative of a planet they considered prey. He was leaving as someone they would not risk provoking again. The return to Earth was unannounced. No broadcasts marked the shuttle's descent, no ceremonial reception awaited at the landing site. The few who knew of the mission were already present, watching in silence as the hatch opened and Rains stepped onto the tarmac. He carried nothing, and there was no visible sign of what had been done. The air was heavy with the unspoken understanding that whatever had occurred aboard the Tirate flagship would never be entered into any official record. The debriefing took place in a secure chamber beneath the United Nations complex. Only 3 people were in the room: the Secretary General, the Intelligence Chief, and Rains. The account was concise. No speculation, no embellishment. The outcome was clear: the Tirate fleet had withdrawn from Earth's vicinity within hours, their departure as disciplined as their arrival had been. The reason for that retreat remained unspoken, but no one in the room needed to ask. Outside those walls, the public explanation was simple. Negotiations had concluded with a recognition of mutual boundaries and a commitment to non-aggression. The statement was crafted with diplomatic precision, portraying the event as a testament to dialogue and restraint. News outlets carried images of world leaders praising the achievement, their relief thinly disguised as confidence. The people believed the crisis had been resolved through words alone. Rains offered no correction. He understood that the truth, if told openly, would undermine the illusion necessary for peace to hold. Fear could deter an enemy, but it could also drive them to desperate action if made public. The power of what had been done lay in its subtlety, known to those who needed to know, invisible to those who did not. In the weeks that followed, Earth's defenses were quietly reinforced. Funding flowed into shipbuilding, orbital monitoring, and the rapid development of technologies that had previously languished in research phases. New alliances formed with neighboring systems, drawn by the sudden perception that humanity could defend itself in ways others could not fully comprehend. The shadow of the Tyrant encounter gave weight to every agreement signed in those days. For Rains, the return to routine was an illusion. The mission had required no open combat, but it had carried its own toll. He replayed the final moments in the dining chamber, not with regret, but with the clarity of someone who understood the necessity of an action even as he questioned what it meant for his own humanity. Assassination and negotiation had been indistinguishable in that moment. Both had served the same end. Among the Tyrant, word of the event spread in forms no human intelligence could fully track. The official record named the king's death as the result of sudden illness. Unofficially, stories traveled along the ranks of their warriors and officers. They spoke of a human who had entered the king's presence unarmed and left alive, while the ruler himself had not. They called him the Shadow without a blade. The name carried both caution and respect, ensuring that the idea of provoking humanity came with a lingering edge of uncertainty. Time dulled the immediate tension, but the legacy of that encounter endured. When Tyrant patrols entered contested systems, their commanders were careful to avoid direct confrontations with human vessels. Trade emissaries from other civilizations approached Earth with a mix of curiosity and caution, seeking to understand the quiet power that had turned back one of the galaxy's most feared empires. Years later, Rains remained an unremarkable figure to the public eye, his role buried beneath layers of classification. He attended small diplomatic functions, met with foreign delegations, and spoke rarely in public forums. To those who shook his hand, he was just another envoy. To those who understood the truth, he was the man who had ended a war before it began, without firing a shot. The galaxy would remember the Tyrant King's fall as an anomaly, a break in the pattern of endless conquest. Earth would remember it, quietly, as the moment it stepped out from under the shadow of inevitability. And Rains, alone with his thoughts, carried the simple truth that had defined it all. Humanity's greatest strength was not in its weapons, but in its will to decide the terms of its own survival.